What is going on, people? It is another episode of Unfiltered coming your way right here and now. Officially, this will go down as episode number 305 in your scorecard. You can jump on board 24/7, 365. It is easy. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. Get over the artist formerly known as Twitter, X, if you will. If you aren't already, excuse me, give me a follow at Casey Stern. Get up into the bio, and there you can get and follow through to our YouTube channel and or Instagram, both at Unfiltered with Casey Stern. When you get over the YouTube channel, like, subscribe, you can get all the content, the videos, the conversations, the interviews with players and coaches and managers and analysts and all sorts of people here over the last couple of years. It is good to have you. We've got a lot to get to here on today's show. I want to bounce around Major League Baseball, kind of assess the damages of where we are sitting as we inch closer to the trade deadline. We'll get into that. We'll talk a little prospects are cool. Parades are cooler because why not? We're in that time period. Also want to bounce around, talk a little bit of the Stanley Cup final and get into the NBA finals and maybe even a dose of Caitlin Clark as well. We, as always, are happy to be presented by our good friends at Bet Online. So let me tell you, the Bet Online is your number one source for your NBA finals and Stanley Cup finals information this season. Every stat, every matchup, live odds, and spreads, all while the games are being played. So when the game's over, then you head over to the online casino. You get a game of blackjack, poker, unwind with over 150 different slot games. So get over the website today. Get in on all this action. Use the promo code BELIEVE. It's BLEAV. You'll get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. It is Bet Online where the game starts as we get started here. Let's talk about assessing the damages. Often we say it's too early to panic. We are past that point. When you're sitting here now into June, what is it, the 11th as I do this, you are now past that point and you certainly can panic. But now you have to also assess how realistic is our opportunity to get into the playoffs. And if we're not going to get there, what the hell are we going to do to make things better moving forward? Because, there's that, and I want to use the expletive, but or get off the pot. And a lot of teams sit there every year and they stay right in that midriff, and you've got to figure out what you're going to do, if you will, in that intersection. Just like in driving, can't hesitate. So which teams need to go and push and go further and push that pedal down, and which teams need to go sell? We'll get into a little bit of that, but obviously want to get your thoughts. So let me know along the way what team you root for, and give me thoughts in the comments. Jump in on Twitter, X, if you will, and let me know your take on it. Clearly, as we get into the American League first, the Yankees are not in this category in terms of anything except for pushing. And part of that push will be the return of Garrett Cole, who obviously looked pretty good in terms of what he did on Sunday, 4 2/3, only 1 run. He's inching closer to making his return. Soto already back now in a DH spot. We know the way Gila has pitched. And when you look at the way the Yankees have performed, this is, and I keep saying this is really the best situation the Yankees have been in to win a World Series in a long period of time. You can use, if you want, the shortened season in 2020 where they look like the best team and the Rays took them out. But there was a lot of helter-skelter considering it was in such a shortened campaign. Nobody knew what to expect. Now, when you look at where they are, what they've been able to manage through without Garrett Cole, and to get to this point where they're sitting there, 47-21, and have been brilliant, they're in a really good spot. So are the Orioles. They're one of the interesting teams, I think, to watch as we get towards the deadline. Obviously, we know in the offseason, they changed everything. Brought in Corbin Burns, who's been great. But last year at the deadline, they should have pushed. They should have gone harder. They should have pushed that pedal down. They should have gone in with not all your top prospects. I'm not saying you trade. Obviously, you're not moving Jackson Holiday and some of the guys that they had down in their system going back a year ago at the deadline. But the whole idea of the prospects are cool, parades are cooler, is that if you get a chance, if you are right there and you can push that pedal and get over the edge and you have a chance to win, you have to try and do it. The Orioles last year, no offense to Jack Flaherty, probably didn't go far enough. Now we got to see them go further, especially when you're dealing with teams who are going to get greedy like the Yankees, and you're sitting there in a situation in the American League West where you still got a lot of teams that are within striking distance who maybe don't deserve to be, including, if you look at, obviously, the Texas Rangers, who have not played well, the defending champs under 500, but Seattle hasn't run away just yet, and they're still in the thick of things. You look at the wild card race, you've got teams in it you never thought would even be there, and even the jokes and the teams that were crapping on, like what the hell have the Jays been doing here this season? Well, all they've been doing is sitting there 2 games under 500, but they're just 3 out of a wild card. So when you look at kind of the landscape of the American League, if you're going to push and you're going to really get further, you got to, I think, do more than the Orioles did a year ago. That to me is something to watch in terms of Baltimore, but we know how stocked that team is. A lot of youth, a lot of potential, but they're also in the here and now and have done a heck of a job. Got to give Alex Cora a ton of credit. The fact that the Red Sox, and we know how well Houck has pitched, we know they've had some bright spots. But if you would have told anybody before the season, we're all making jokes about what the hell's this Netflix documentary even going to be about? What a joke that thing's going to be, that you got the Reds. Nobody wants to watch the Red Sox. Now, look, I covered the Red Sox with the school in Boston, love the city. I've been in those moments where, okay, would have been great to have a daily basis, where you're sitting there and getting all the trials and tribulations of all the wonder that was coming. But there wasn't any wonder. There was no wonderful. It didn't look like anything positive was going to happen. And for them to be sitting there at 500 and just a couple of games out of a wild card spot and being able to say that they're going to play meaningful games perhaps down the stretch, what a situation for the Red Sox to be in, not getting enough credit. Obviously, rare to see the Rays where they are. They DFA Ramirez. Things haven't gone well. This is a weird spot for Tampa Bay. You wonder now how much they really start to just totally look forward, considering they're always advancing forward, even when they have a chance in the here and now. But the here and now not probably there for them this season. In the Central, what a division. If anybody would have told you before the year, hey, look, what's going to be the only division where at one point, now Detroit's a game under, you had 4 teams over 500. And you got 3, and you look at 2 of them in Kansas City and Cleveland and how well they've played, nobody would have picked it. We all knew the Royals would be better. We all knew, obviously, about Bobby Witt Jr. We knew about some of the potential that they had already shown a year ago. But who had Seth Lugo in their scorecard as a Cy Young candidate? I know for sure I didn't. I know a lot of Met fans did not. God bless him as much as they love him and all the things he did in the bullpen. And when he was a chameleon starting going back and forth, nobody had the dude as a Cy Young candidate. And he'd been a Cy Young candidate, which is crazy. But the fact that the fact that the Guardians, I'll be doing that for years. The fact that the Guardians are sitting there in first place and their Cy Young candidate in Bieber, who had come out with 2 brilliant starts. I think he had 20 strikeouts, memory serves me correctly, in the first 2 starts of the season, and then goes down. And you already were a team that seemingly was not going to be in the thick of it this year. New manager, new culture being created. Well, screw all that. Just like the Brewers have proved in the National League. We've been talking about this all year here with what these 2 teams have done in the Central. How impressive has Stephen Vogt and that group been? And the fact that they're sitting there with 20 games over 500. With chances of catching the Yankees for the best record. This is not, this is not your mama's division here with the AL Central. It's been impressive. And the crazy juxtaposition of that is that we thought the AL West would be this. You got Houston, where obviously you get a change at manager and guys getting older, but so much talent. And we'll get into them in a second. This is before the year. You've got obviously Texas, the defending champs. We knew what Seattle was. And we thought that's going to be a 3-team race of teams way over 500, all sitting there in the thick of things, all who could make the postseason, not in the American League Central. And then you got in 4th place in the Central Skubal, who, by the way, got to be the leading Cy Young candidate right now, in my opinion. And they're sitting there with A.J. Hinch and company right there around 500, just a couple of games, outskirts of town of the wild card, and right in the thick of things. Been just uber impressive. The Astros situation, just to hit on that, you got Tucker sitting there with the shin. You got Urquidy with Tommy John. Christian Javier, who I love, with Tommy John. They didn't have Verlander at the beginning of the year. They've been banged up. Abreu back and forth. They got injuries all over the place. Guys disappointing. Bregman the way he was out of the gates. How about the way Hader and Presley were out of the gates? For them to be fair with everything going wrong, and I know this is sitting there glass half full, but I'm in that kind of mood today for a change. But if you're sitting there and you're looking at the Astros, you got to be thinking glass half full. I mean, you're 7 games under 500, not great, but nobody run away in the division from you. And you're in a situation where if you look at the way you started, you've at least settled things and kind of played 500 here for the last 2-3 weeks, which has kept you in the mix. 1 push, 8 out of 9, 12 out of 14, and you're right in there. They're going to need something like that. But when you look at the pedigree of the players they have, and guys who aren't going to have any give and certainly any give up, The Astros are not forgotten for me just yet, even though they've dealt with so many injuries and so many things over the course of the season. But the Rangers, right there, Scherzer, fan 5, I think it was, right, in his last rehab outing. He's on his way back. Who knows what else you get at the deadline or how far you push, but the Rangers, obviously, we know what they can do when they get to a postseason. We saw it a year ago. We know it's Bruce Bochy. So they're on the Mariners' tails for me, as close as you could be for a team that has not played well and had a lot go wrong, sitting 3 games under 500. Nationally, Philadelphia Phillies have been, for me, right there with the Yankees as the most impressive team in baseball. Ranger Suarez sitting there, maybe the leading Cy Young candidate right now. Certainly, if he's not leading, he's right there. He's been brilliant. We knew Wheeler, and you said, okay, well, Wheeler and Nola. We like Suarez because we know he's such a gamer when he gets to the postseason. But that was the whole thing with the Phillies in general. It was always about, well, you just got to get them to the postseason. They can't have a bell-to-bell stretch. They're not good at the beginning of the year. They have to wait until they get into the second half, and then they turn it on, and then they show you what they're capable of. But that's been the different story about this year, is they've been bell-to-bell, and it's because of what they've gotten from guys they didn't expect. The more that they got out of Suarez, clearly, the way the bullpen has performed, and Alec Boehm, for me, right there at the forefront of all of that. They haven't had to be carried by their stars because they've had depth performances. And now, when you look at that management, the desire from ownership, the way they've been at deadlines in the past, and the way they performed down the stretch getting better, you combine that with the injury to Acuna, off of the Strider injury, and the Braves certainly now, and I'm not talking about just because they dropped a couple of games in a row, but not looking like the team that's the juggernaut that I thought could have easily been the best team in the National League, even with everything the Dodgers did before the season began. You combine those things in Philadelphia, a dangerous team right now. By the way, I want to get into Atlanta, but can we point out, I mentioned Alex Cora, the job Davey Martinez is doing, how the Nationals sitting there only 5 games under 500 and performing better than the Mets, which is sickening if you're a Met fan, but I think you got to give credit to that Nationals staff. When you look at the Braves, if anybody can overcome, we talk about prospects are cool, parades are cooler, right? When to push. If anybody can overcome this, it's a guy who's been the best executive in Major League Baseball over the last decade or so in Alex Anthopoulos, with what he has done since he got here where I am in Atlanta. He's been unbelievable, and he's made all the right moves, to use the movie title. You go back to a couple of years ago, obviously, with Soler, and you think about the Jock Petersons, and you think about how about in this offseason, the Sale move. We mentioned Cy Young candidates. Anybody have him in that category? We thought Strider would be the leading guy. Maybe Max Fried would be in there. Anybody have Chris Sale in there? There hasn't been a better bang for your buck move that was made in the offseason. And that is why the danger of that in the system and everything that Alex Anthopoulos has at his disposal and the way their contracts are and their understanding of what their needs are and how to play within the margins at a deadline, he's going to be dangerous and he's going to keep Atlanta in the mix. And the Braves are still, to me, very dangerous in the postseason, but they're going to have to figure out a couple of things. A, need depth in the rotation. B, probably going to end the bullpen. C, got to get a bat, and probably not in that priority order because nobody had Marcell Ozuna. Speaking of guys stepping up, right? We talk about the Phillies, Alec Boehm, Ranger Suarez, right? Nobody had that. Nobody had Heel with the Yankees. These are the things you need to occur, right? Bieber goes down. How are other guys going to step up? These are the things you need. Well, you sit there, you look at the Atlanta Braves. Nobody had Marcell Ozuna, pretty much driving in a run a game for like the first 2 months of the season, or Chris Sale dealing the way he's been. But it's got the Braves to this point where they're sitting there still, as I do this, 7 games over 500. And even though the division has a gap right there in the wild card race, and with a good opportunity sitting there just, 4 games out. The National League Central Division is crazy to me. Can't figure it out. Don't know what to believe. I keep waiting for the Milwaukee Brewers to come back to the pack, and it doesn't happen. I keep waiting for the Cubs or the Cardinals to go on a run to cut the gap, and it doesn't happen. Reds have been the team that's played the best here over the last couple of weeks, winning 8 out of 10, sitting there now still 7 games out. But I really don't understand this division, and I don't know whether or not it's the Brewers winning a division of disappointment or how much credit we should give them or somewhere in between. But obviously that system that was created and built there with David Stearns now in New York and Craig Counsell now in Chicago, 7 games behind them in the division. Sure, Brewer fans enjoying that. it has continued. And the Brewers just continue to win baseball games, 11 games, 12 games now over 500 as we sit here on the 11th of June. The Los Angeles Dodgers. It's interesting because if you read the Athletic, and I might get into this, some of it, but if you read that Athletic poll that all the players did, and I always find it fun. I mean, it was only, 60 players or whatever they polled, and who knows who the players were, what was the cross-section, I got no idea. But it's fun reading the answers. And the people, I mean, everybody wants to get on the villain, people getting on the Dodgers, some players saying, oh, they could spend $1 billion, they're just going to get swept in 3 days, and who knows whether or not that's the case, but people are crapping on the Dodgers because they haven't been dominating enough. The team's got a 7.5 game lead in the division. They had injuries all up and down the rotation, clearly, right? And we knew that. Now, they had that last year, which is one of the surprises of how well they performed during the regular season to even get to that point. It's why they weren't that dominant juggernaut really facing the Diamondbacks and getting knocked out in the postseason. But with all that has gone wrong, with all that they haven't put together this run of winning 25 out of 28 games or whatever people expect, or winning 120 games in the regular season, or whatever the case may be, maybe the Dodgers got us right where they want us. Because what's been the deal in the past, right, with Doc and that club, with Dave Roberts? They go when they win the division, and then we expect them to fail. But here's what's happened in that. They've played in a lot of these seasons, and I've talked about this over the years. They've played so well and have gone and been so dominant for stretches of the season. They went forever without playing a big game. They didn't have any of that. They had to have moments like Teoscar and company had in the Bronx. Those were the only things they would have in the course of a season because they're sitting there boat racing teams, putting them out to pasture. Then they get into the postseason, and they're facing teams that are in that Game 7 mode all the freaking time, and they get wiped out, and that is a real thing. Momentum is a thing. Quote, what is it? Little Giants, reason momentum is changing his address. Well, momentum changes the address quick. You lose one game where you got to sit there and win 2 out of 3. Forget it. You're out, right? Or 3 out of 5 or 5 out of 7, depending upon what the series is. Maybe the Dodgers got us right where they want us. Sitting there only 15 over 500, not dominating to the way you think, despite the way Ohtani has played, despite the way Betts has played, despite the fact that there's still 7.5 games ahead of a Padre team that hasn't been that bad, all things considered, comparatively to last year, sitting there a half a game or whatever it is now in front of a wild card. Braves got a 4-game lead. You got San Diego a half a game ahead, and then you get the Giants, and then the Cubs and the Reds and the Cardinals sitting there half a game behind. So that wild card race is what makes it interesting for teams to have the difficulty of not knowing what to do when it comes to the postseason. And I want to specifically get to the Mets here, which is why I skipped them. Mets are 28-36. They haven't been good. They split series in London. They've won some games here and there, trying to find these Torrens and other stories to make you feel good if you're a Met fan, but they have not been good. They are 8 games under 500. 8. But they're only 3.5 out of the wild card. And this is the problem. Now, a couple things here. Number one, David Stearns didn't come in here and get sold by Steve Cohen and sell Steve Cohen and get that match together to go and do the dumb things that the Mets have done in terms of let's go push, let's go, think that we're better or pretend that we're better than we really are for the public, for the media, for ourselves, for arrogant, whatever the reasoning is. This is not a good baseball team. Now, considering they've had no Kodai Senga, considering the way that Lindor has played, considering who's been in the rotation, considering the injuries in the bullpen, it's really not that bad. And I know people don't want to hear this, but if you look at this roster, think about this. If you look at the Mets roster and you consider no Kodai Senga, the terrible play from certain guys you expected a ton from, and you put Lindor in there, you want to put McNeil in there, whomever else, the issues and then the injury to Diaz, no Brooks Raley, new manager, and you're sitting there and you're 8 under 500 and 3.5 out of a wild card, it's all hallmark and roses because that is really not that bad. I want to tell you all that before the season when you knew who was in your rotation, when you knew what this roster was and wasn't, it's not that bad. But, a big old but, they're not that good either. And that is why you must sit there and look in the mirror if you're a Met fan and be understanding and be realistic about where you are. Now let's get to Pete Alonso. If you're going to move Pete Alonso, you're probably not bringing him back. It's happened before. We've seen it where guys get traded and they say, oh, keep my locker here for me. That's when a team's really, really bad and it's a rental and it's an older player and they're coming back on a one-year deal. Those kind of things occur. They rarely occur in situations like this, where a guy already is going to date and get out there and look into the market and see what else he's got. Where a guy already is going to, when you look at the agent, sit there in the situation you're in, going to have the team by the balls because the Mets have to overpay. He's not Freddie Freeman. He's not Matt Olson. But the Mets may have to pay him like he's better than both to keep him. And I still don't think they could do it without him going out to free agency in the first place. Then there's no guarantee that they can do it after he gets out to free agency because he's going to date and because the gap in the money may not be that big and because they may use the Mets just to raise the dollar amount for other teams. This is not an easy decision. People are going to act like, no, you can't. Now, this is not the, do you sign Pete Alonso? I think you sign Pete Alonso. Why? Is he the greatest player that ever lived? Excuse me, he's not. Do Met fans think he's better than maybe other teams' fans do? Probably. But where are the Mets without him? They're not anywhere with him, but they're way worse without him. You already got enough holes to fill. So he's at least one guy you know. And the devil you know better than the devil you don't. And that dude in the middle of the order and what he's been for the team and what he provides in terms of power, I think you keep him for sure. But it's not that easy. Because now we're coming up on a deadline where I don't know how much you're getting for Pete Alonso. I mean, sitting there, you're not playing like Ohtani. I don't know how much you're getting for him, but if you can get value for him at the deadline for a rental, for a guy who's going to leave anyway, who may leave you hanging out to dry, you may have to move him. And that's the hard part. I'm curious, if you're a Met fan, do you think they should trade Pete Alonso? I don't think, to me, it's not a should or shouldn't. Because, and people want to make it this way, and this business is always that way, right? It's like, oh no, well, you can't sit in the gray area, right? You got to sit there black and white. You must trade him or you must not. You must sign him or you must. It's not that easy. I got to know what the value is. I got to know how he plays leading up into the deadline. I got to know what other teams are offering. I got to know what that means. I got to know what the conversations have been that we don't know about really what their temperature is on that litmus of what they think their chances are to sign him in free agency. A lot of questions with Alonso. Lot. Mets got to figure that out. It's one of the biggest questions for me at the deadline for sure as we move forward. Want to bounce around, hit another couple things here quickly. Just some quick points. Number one, first of all, in the Caitlin Clark situation. I'll just say this. How anybody is finding any negativity in this is disgusting. And that goes for players, it goes for people in the WNBA, it goes for pundits, it goes for idiots on Twitter, it goes for whoever you are. Eyes on basketball, eyes on the WNBA, on players who have not had the attention that they have deserved, and I know some of them, worked with them. That's great for them, and that's the way we should be looking at it. It's great for them financially. It's great for them with sponsors. It's great for them for notoriety. It's great for all of them. It's great for the entire league. It's great for women's basketball, and it's great for basketball. The fact that we're sitting there, men, women, what race, who gives a crap? How are we looking at this in anything other than, here's a fantastic basketball player. Now, look, ready to play internationally, should have been on the Olympic team. To me, I think it's dumb. Should have been on the Olympic team. You want to manage her minutes based on you don't think she's ready physically or whatever the hell the reason was. I don't get it. Spurned or scorned or whatever because they don't want to deal with it. That I'm not holding any water with either. But it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But anybody who's sitting there and saying anything negative about Clayton Clark, and it happens, I see it all the time. It's going even through Facebook. I see people, oh, enough of this, like acting like she's Taylor Swift, and we're seeing too much of her in a Chiefs game. I mean, you people are ridiculous. The disrespect is stupid, and it's got to stop. Anybody disrespecting the two teams that are about to waltz away with these two finals better understand why they're there. There is one specific thing that these two teams in the Florida Panthers, I almost said the Carolina Panthers because I'm in a different sport. The Florida Panthers and the Boston Celtics have that is putting them in this position. These two teams do not need to be carried by stars. If you look at the Oilers and you think about Connor McDavid and Draisaitl, you think about Kyrie Irving and Doncic, you think about teams that we've already seen out of these postseasons where you're relying on one line to carry you, right? Think about, Pasternak with the Boston Bruins. You want to go hockey, and I'm just off the top of my head. I could even think being a Knicks fan, having to carry on Jalen Brunson. And as the depth depleted, the Knicks depleted. The Boston Celtics and the Florida Panthers don't need to rely on one player. They don't need to rely on one star, even though they have them. People are going to get on, well, Jason Tatum, he doesn't have to do more because they have depth for days, because they have different guys who can carry them constantly on a night in, night out basis. They can ride hot hands from quarter to quarter. They don't have to ride one for 2 months. And the Florida Panthers, the same situation. 2 goals from Rodriguez in game 2. It can be everyone. Bobrovsky not getting enough credit. But they come in waves, their attack, which is so relentless, because they're able to run lines and they don't have to rely on one person to go and get you because the next guy will get it done. Depth is the biggest key to why these two teams are about to walk away, maybe both of them, with sweeps in the NHL and the NBA. We, across the board, are happy to have you here. An Unfiltered episode number 305 in the books. Got more coming here in the next couple weeks, including guests on the baseball side. You bring your comments on Twitter, on X, Facebook, anywhere you want. The YouTube channel, Unfiltered with Casey Stern, and the same address for Instagram as well. Give us a follow over there. We will see you next time on Unfiltered. As always, we're presented by our good